We begin this journey with a man who always followed the script. From the moment he was born, the world around him whispered what to do. As a child, he was told to be obedient, to sit still, to raise his hand before speaking, to color inside the lines. And he did. His life was a checklist written by others. Finish school, get good grades, go to college, find a respectable job, work hard, save money, get married, buy a house, have children, retire, then finally rest. He did it all, every single step.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But what if following all the steps doesn't lead to the destination we were promised? What if the path society laid out was never meant to fulfill us, but only to contain us? From the outside, his life looked perfect. The house, the car, the family, the job. But inside, a quiet emptiness grew louder every year. And yet, he kept going, because that is what he was told to do. You will be happy someday, they said. Just keep going. You're almost there. But when is there? You see, we live in a world where conformity is praised and questioning is punished. The man did not question. He trusted the system. He believed in the blueprint. In school, he memorized what was required. He never asked, "Why am I learning this?" In college, he chose the major that would lead to the safest job, not the one that awakened his spirit. At work, he performed with robotic precision. He was praised, promoted, respected, but never alive. He silenced the small voice inside him that asked, "Is this all there is?" Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But this man lived the unexamined life to perfection. He never paused to reflect. He was too busy achieving, too busy running. But running toward what? That's the question we must ask ourselves. Are we living or are we performing? Are we fulfilling our soul's calling or just playing a role written by someone else? The man followed the rules to the letter, but he never wrote his own. There's a strange moment that happens in the life of someone who has done everything right. One day they wake up and realize they don't know who they are. They've spent so many years being what others wanted them to be. They forgot how to be themselves. This happened to our man. One evening, sitting in his perfectly decorated living room, after a long day of meetings, emails, and endless noise, he felt a silence that terrified him. Not the peaceful silence of nature or meditation, a hollow silence, a vacuum of identity. He had everything and yet nothing. This is the tragedy of living according to the world's script. You gain the world but lose your soul. You become successful in a game you never wanted to play. And worse, you don't realize it until it's too late. How many of us are just like him? How many of us are chasing dreams that aren't ours? The philosopher Alan Watts once said, "We seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own. For we think in terms of languages and images which we did not invent, but which were given to us by our society." Let that sink in. How much of you is truly you? He spent his weekends mowing the lawn, attending birthday parties, managing bills, and planning vacations. But none of it touched his core. These were rituals of routine, not expressions of joy. He laughed, but without depth. He smiled, but without warmth. He was present, but not alive. He became a master of social performance, always saying the right thing, always acting the right way. But truthfully, he was vanishing inside. And here's the cruel irony: society applauds this. We give awards to those who sacrifice their inner life for outer achievement. We admire the man who works 80 hours a week, not knowing he's running from himself. We praise the woman who has it all, not realizing she's exhausted beyond recovery. We honor the checklist, not the soul. And so we create millions of humans who are successful in public, but broken in private. At some point, he began to feel anxious. Not the kind of anxiety that comes from deadlines or traffic. A deeper anxiety. The kind that whispers, "You are not meant for this." But he didn't know what this was. He only knew he couldn't breathe. He went to doctors. They gave him pills. He went to therapists. They gave him labels. But no one gave him the truth, that his life was a lie. Not because he was dishonest, but because he never questioned. He trusted the system more than his soul. Why is it that we wait until crisis to awaken? Why must suffering be the catalyst for truth? Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But this man had no why. All he had was how. How to get promoted, how to raise a family, how to retire early, how to survive, but never how to live. He was efficient, not fulfilled, productive, not passionate, managed, not meaningful. And so one day he broke, quietly, without fireworks, without a dramatic collapse, just a quiet admission to himself, "I don't know who I am." This was the beginning of something new. In the ruins of his perfectly constructed life, a seed of awakening began to grow. But awakening is not pleasant. It is violent. It is disorienting. When you peel back the layers of a false self, you are left with a terrifying question: what if I've wasted my life? And yet, this question is the doorway to freedom. Ask yourself this now: if everything you've worked for suddenly vanished, who would you be? If your job disappeared, your titles, your possessions, what would be left? Could you sit in silence with yourself and feel peace? Or would the silence reveal a stranger? Most people can't answer this because they've never met themselves. They've only met their conditioning. The man began to question, slowly, gently. He started journaling at night. He asked himself, what do I actually enjoy? And for the first time, he didn't know the answer. He'd been so busy chasing what was expected, he never asked what was authentic. He started reading philosophy. He stumbled upon Marcus Aurelius, who said, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." These words hit him like a thunderclap. He realized he had never truly lived. He had only existed. He began to walk alone in the mornings before work. No phone, no music, just his breath and the sky. These walks became sacred. He started noticing trees again, the smell of rain, the sun on his skin. For the first time in decades, he felt something stir. Not happiness, not excitement, something deeper. Presence, being, aliveness. But the journey had just begun. Questioning the life you built is terrifying. It threatens your relationships, your identity, your future. But what's the alternative? To slowly die in a comfortable cage, to smile while your soul weeps? He knew there was no going back. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you taste authenticity, the artificial becomes unbearable. He stopped pretending. At meetings, he spoke less. At home, he listened more. He stopped filling every silence with noise. He stopped pretending to care about things that didn't matter. And slowly, something miraculous happened. His anxiety lessened. His insomnia faded. His laughter returned. Not the polite chuckle, but the deep, belly-shaking kind. He was coming home to himself. But here's the paradox. He hadn't changed the outer world. He still had the same job, the same house, the same responsibilities. What changed was how he showed up. He no longer saw life as a performance. He saw it as a practice, a daily returning to truth. And this made all the difference. In this space of inner clarity, he began to ask a question that would guide the rest of his life. What do I truly value? Not what his parents valued, not what society prized, but what he valued. This question, though simple, is revolutionary. Because when you know your values, you stop chasing shadows. You stop comparing. You start living. He realized he valued simplicity, connection, creativity, nature, and truth. And so, he began to shape his life around these. He downsized. He let go of toxic relationships. He started painting again, something he hadn't done since childhood. He began volunteering at a local shelter. He wasn't trying to be virtuous. He was just following what felt real. And for the first time, his actions and soul were aligned. But the world around him didn't understand. Friends asked, "Why are you changing?" Some distanced themselves. Others mocked him. But he didn't mind, because he had finally found something more precious than approval: peace. And peace, he realized, is not a destination. It's a frequency, a way of being, a choice. Now I ask you, what if the life you're living is not your own? What if you've mistaken obedience for purpose? What would happen if you stopped following and started listening to yourself? Could you bear the discomfort of truth in exchange for the freedom of authenticity? You see, when a man begins to live from his own truth, the world around him resists. Not because it is evil, but because it is afraid. Afraid of change, afraid of freedom, afraid of someone who no longer fits the mold. The man became a mirror to those around him. His inner transformation reflected back their own denial. And few people want to see that. It's easier to call someone crazy than admit your own discontent. It's easier to stay busy than to ask, "Am I fulfilled?" This is when the real test began. Because awakening is not a one-time event, it's a practice. A daily choice. A commitment to live deliberately. To be conscious in a world that thrives on automation. The man had to unlearn decades of conditioning. He had to peel away layers of identity that no longer served him. He began to see how deeply society had programmed him. He realized that most of his desires were not his own. They were implanted by marketing, by culture, by fear. He remembered how, as a boy, he loved to climb trees, draw dragons, and ask wild questions about the universe. But those things were labeled as cute when he was young and useless when he got older. Slowly, his natural curiosity was replaced by rigid expectations. He was taught to suppress wonder in favor of practical goals, or to trade creativity for security, to play it safe. But now, as a grown man returning to his essence, he saw that safety had cost him his soul. And so, he began to reclaim it. He started writing stories again. Not for fame, not for money, just for the joy of it. He began to play, to sing, to sit under stars and feel awe. He started asking the old questions again. Who am I? Why am I here? What does it mean to live well? Have you asked yourself these questions lately? Or have you too been caught in the machinery of expectation? There's a dangerous myth we must confront: the myth of the good life. The idea that if you just follow all the right steps, happiness is guaranteed. But happiness is not a formula. It's a byproduct of alignment. You can't manufacture it. You can't fake it. You can only uncover it when you stop pretending. The man had chased the good life all his life, only to find it was a mirage, a corporate-sponsored illusion. He began reading more deeply. He found solace in the words of Carl Jung, who wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That line struck him. To become who you truly are. Not who your parents wanted. Not who your boss expects. Not who society rewards. But who you are. Most people never reach this privilege. They're too busy becoming what they think they should be. The man realized he had spent most of his life being a stranger to himself. But now, he was changing that. He began to see himself not as a machine built for productivity, but as a soul built for experience. He stopped measuring his worth by his output. He started valuing presence over performance. He noticed how often people talked without listening, worked without resting, moved without feeling. He didn't judge them, he understood them, because he had been them. He started simplifying. He gave away clothes he didn't wear. He canceled subscriptions he didn't use. He deleted apps that drained his attention. He made space, not just in his environment, but in his mind. And in that space, he found clarity. He realized that peace isn't something you find. It's something you make room for. And most people are too cluttered to receive it. He also began to feel something strange: grief. Grief for the years he had lost to pretending. Grief for the moments he missed while chasing someone else's dream. Grief for the boy he once was, who just wanted to be free. This grief was not weakness. It was sacred. It was healing. It was the soul mourning its own suppression. And through that mourning, he made peace with his past. He forgave himself for not knowing. He honored the version of himself who did his best with the tools he had. And now, something extraordinary happened. Joy returned. Not excitement. Not distraction. Joy. The quiet, steady kind. The kind that arises when your actions match your values. The kind that doesn't need an audience. He found joy in simple things: making tea, watching birds, listening to his child's laughter. He didn't need more. He just needed truth. But still, the world pulled on him. Emails, deadlines, obligations. The noise never stopped. But he had changed. He no longer let the noise dictate his being. He responded instead of reacted. He created boundaries. He learned to say no, not from anger, but from clarity. He realized that every yes to something false is a no to something real. One evening, he looked in the mirror and saw his own eyes, not the eyes of a performer, but the eyes of a man who had returned. He saw lines on his face, not as signs of aging, but as maps of experience. He saw the weariness, but also the wisdom. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't enlightened, but he was awake. And that made all the difference. He began connecting with others from this deeper place. And conversations became richer. Friendships became more authentic. He no longer needed to impress. He just needed to be. People started to notice. Some were inspired. Others were threatened. But he didn't mind. He wasn't living for their approval anymore. He also began to serve. Not to save others, not to be a hero, but because service is the natural expression of a full heart. He mentored young people who were lost like he once was. He listened without trying to fix. He shared without preaching. And through that, he discovered that the greatest gift you can give the world is your own wholeness. He learned to embrace solitude, not as loneliness, but as nourishment. He spent time in silence, in nature, or in reflection. He realized that society trains us to fear aloneness because stillness reveals the truth. And truth demands change. But he was no longer afraid of change. He had made peace with not knowing. He had learned to trust the unfolding. One night, he read a line from Rainer Maria Rilke, "The only journey is the one within." He closed the book, smiled, and whispered, "Yes." He finally understood. All those years of chasing, striving, performing, they were part of the journey. Not mistakes, just steps. Steps toward home. And now I ask you, what are you chasing? Whose dream are you living? What would happen if you stopped running and started listening? Could you handle the silence? Could you face your truth? The man had done everything society asked of him, and it broke him. But in that breaking, he found his soul. He discovered that the life he was told to live was never his life. It was a costume. And now, naked of pretense, he could finally breathe. He still worked. He still paid bills. He still faced challenges. But everything was different. Because he was different, he no longer looked for meaning in achievement. He found meaning in presence. He no longer tried to escape discomfort. He met it with compassion. He no longer lived for the future. He lived now. And that's the great secret. The life you're searching for is not in the next promotion, the next purchase, the next vacation. It's in this breath, this moment, this choice right here, right now. Are you living your truth or someone else's? The man had spent decades asleep, but now he was awake. And once you wake up, you cannot go back to sleep. Not fully. Not comfortably. Something in you changes forever. A fire is lit. A hunger for truth. A taste of freedom that cannot be forgotten. He wasn't special. He wasn't chosen. He was just willing. Willing to question, to feel, to change. And that willingness made all the difference. He became a new kind of man, not a man who obeys, but a man who remembers who he is, why he's here, what matters. And now I ask you again, are you willing? Willing to question what you've been told, to sit in discomfort, to listen to your soul, because in the end, no one can live your truth for you. You must walk the path alone. But you won't be alone, because in walking it, you join a silent brotherhood, a quiet sisterhood of those who chose authenticity over approval. You become reborn, not in some mystical way, but in the most grounded, human way possible. You begin to live. The man who did everything society told him to do had reached a quiet turning point. He no longer sought applause or approval. What he craved now was something far more elusive, inner truth. He wasn't trying to escape the world, but to finally meet it as himself. That alone was a revolution. Because in a society built on roles and projections, authenticity becomes the rarest act of rebellion. He had once believed that peace was something you found after checking off every box. But now he knew peace wasn't at the end of a checklist, it was in every moment you chose to stop pretending. He understood that freedom is not the absence of responsibility, but the presence of alignment. He still had bills, a job, and people who depended on him. But now, he met those obligations not as a prisoner, but as a conscious participant in his own life. He began to notice how deeply fear had run his life. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of being left behind. These fears had dictated every major decision he ever made. But now, as he observed them without reacting, they began to lose their grip on him. He realized that the system he had trusted for so long had trained him for obedience, not for self-awareness. It had rewarded compliance, not courage. He saw how easily people sacrificed their truth for a paycheck, their freedom for predictability. And he had compassion for that, because he too had done it for years. One of the greatest shifts came when he stopped running from discomfort. He used to numb it with work, entertainment, small talk, or scrolling. Now he allowed it. He gave it space. He sat with his unease and asked, "What are you trying to show me?" And the answers, though painful, were deeply clarifying. He grieved, not loudly, not all at once, but in waves, for all the years he had lost, for the person he could have been. He grieved the boy who was taught to silence his curiosity, the young man who traded wild dreams for safe decisions. And yet, this grief was sacred. It wasn't weakness, it was the soul reclaiming lost territory. As he allowed the grief, he also made room for joy. Not the synthetic kind pumped out by advertisements, but real, grounded, ordinary joy. The kind you feel when you watch the wind move through trees, or when you share a moment of silence with someone who sees you. He had never known joy could be so quiet and so profound. He started doing things not for achievement, but for love. He painted again. He wrote letters. He made soup from scratch. These things didn't earn him status or money, but they fed his spirit. And for the first time, he understood what it meant to live artfully, not just efficiently. He stopped needing to be somebody. He let go of the chase for titles, promotions, and prestige. That chase had once defined his entire identity. But now it felt hollow. He no longer needed to prove his worth, he had remembered it. He realized that his worth was never in what he did, but in who he was, and in his presence, in his listening, in his integrity. He began to see that the most powerful people are often the quietest, because their power comes not from dominance but from depth. He became more honest, not brutally, but gently. He said what he meant. He stopped over-explaining, stopped apologizing for existing. He no longer twisted himself into shapes to be liked. He simply stood in his truth and let the chips fall where they may. Not everyone understood. Some friends drifted away. Some family members questioned his choices. But he no longer feared their disapproval. He loved them, but he loved his truth more. And in doing so, he finally felt whole. He found a deeper kind of connection with others, not based on shared interests, but shared presence. Conversations slowed down. He listened more than he spoke. He asked real questions and waited for real answers. People felt safe with him not because he fixed them, but because he didn't try to. He began to serve, not from obligation, but from overflow. He volunteered, not to look good, but because it felt right. He mentored quietly, helped where he could. He didn't need to change the world, he just wanted to show up for it, fully. He returned to nature. Walks in the woods became his church. He sat by rivers, watched sunsets, listened to birdsong. These weren't escapes, they were reminders that life is not a problem to solve, but a mystery to live. And he was finally living it. He still had goals, but they were different now. Less about status, more about soul. He wanted to become more kind, more present, more alive. He wanted to love well, to laugh often, to leave people feeling more seen than when he found them. He began to understand that suffering had been his greatest teacher. It stripped away his illusions. It brought him to the edge of himself. And from that edge, he saw clearly. Pain had opened a door that comfort never could. He no longer saw life as a ladder to climb. He saw it as a circle to return to self, to presence, to simplicity. He stopped striving and started aligning. He developed rituals, not productivity hacks, but sacred pauses, morning silence, evening reflection, gratitude before meals. He didn't do these to be spiritual. He did them to stay awake. He realized the most meaningful moments are often the smallest. A shared glance, a kind word, a moment of stillness. These became his new wealth, not what he owned, but what he noticed. He no longer needed to be extraordinary. He found beauty in ordinariness, in washing dishes, folding laundry, walking slowly. These moments, once dismissed, had become doorways to peace. He became a student of life again. Curious, humble, open. He asked more questions than he answered. He listened to children, to elders, to strangers. Everyone, he realized, carries a piece of the puzzle. He read less for information and more for transformation. He didn't want to be clever, he wanted to be wise. He no longer sought to impress. He sought to understand. And slowly, wisdom replaced cleverness. He stopped performing, stopped pretending, stopped polishing his image. And in that rawness, he found freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever he wanted, but the freedom to be who he truly was. And now I ask you, who are you beneath the roles? beneath the masks, beneath the noise? Who would you be if you stopped living for others and started living for truth? Can you imagine it? He had done everything society told him to do, and it had nearly cost him his soul. But in losing his false self, he found something real, something unshakable, something sacred. He didn't have all the answers, but he had better questions. He didn't have a perfect life, but he had a real one. And that, he knew, was enough. He no longer feared death, because he was finally alive. Each day became a gift, not because it was easy, but because it was true. And truth, he had learned, is the beginning of freedom. So now the path is before you. Not a path of escape, but of return. Return to self. Return to soul. Return to what matters.